Before you ever tell someone they don't belong, ask yourself a question most people in power avoid. Who decided who belongs in the first place? Because history is filled with rooms that were never meant to be shared. Rooms built with invisible rules. Rooms guarded by ego. Rooms where talent is welcomed, as long as it arrives in the right package. This is not just a story about a university. It is not just a story about mathematics. It is a story about power, about what happens when authority feels threatened, about how easily brilliance can be questioned when it shows up in a form the system did not expect. And if you listen carefully, you may discover something uncomfortable. Exclusion is rarely about ability. It is about control. Because control decides who speaks. Control decides who is believed. Control decides whose mistakes are forgiven and whose success is investigated. But here is the dangerous truth about control. It only works until someone refuses to shrink. Tonight's story is about a young woman who understood something most people learn too late. You don't argue with prejudice. You outgrow it. You outwork it. You outlast it. And when the moment comes, you let the evidence speak. If you have ever been underestimated, if you have ever walked into a room and felt eyes measuring your worth, if you have ever been told, subtly or directly, that you should lower your expectations, then this story is for you. Because what you are about to hear is not just drama, it is strategy, it is warning, it is preparation. Preparation for the day someone challenges you publicly. Preparation for the moment someone mistakes your silence for weakness. Preparation for the test you didn't ask for but must pass anyway. Now imagine this, a prestigious university lecture hall. Old money, old traditions, old power. The kind of room where reputations are built and careers are destroyed. 40 students sit ready, laptops open, pens poised. And at the front stands a professor whose name alone carries weight. 23 years tenured, department chair, author of a paper that reshaped his field. A man who decides who advances and who quietly disappears. He scans the room. His eyes stop. And with the confidence of someone who has never been challenged successfully, he says, "Who let this black girl into my classroom?" The words didn't just echo, they detonated. The lecture hall at Ridgewell University was built to impress. Arched ceilings, tiered seating, polished oak desks worn smooth by decades of ambition. It was the kind of room where futures were shaped or shattered. 40 students turned, some startled, some curious, some quietly relieved it wasn't them. At the front stood Professor Edward Whitman, gray at the temples, immaculate suit, perfect posture, the kind of man whose reputation entered the room before he did. 23 years tenured, department chair, author of a landmark paper in nonlinear number systems that had been cited across continents. A man who decided who belonged in mathematics. And in the back row, slowly rising to her feet, was Amara Bennett, 19 years old, still, composed, invisible by design. She had chosen that seat on the first day, back corner near the exit, close enough to see the board clearly, far enough to avoid attention. She understood something most people didn't learn until much later in life. Brilliance attracts admiration, but it also attracts resentment. And resentment, when it holds power, is dangerous. Whitman adjusted his glasses and smiled thinly. "You enrolled in advanced abstract systems, Miss Bennett," she replied calmly. "Yes, Bennett. Since you're here, perhaps you can justify your presence." A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the room. Amara did not flinch. She had been here before. Not in this building, not in this classroom, but in this moment. At 8 years old, when her third-grade teacher accused her of copying answers because she finished too quickly. At 12, when classmates said she talked like she thought she was better. At 15, when a counselor suggested she consider something less intense. She learned early that excellence, when packaged in certain skin, made people suspicious. So she mastered restraint. Her homework was always correct, never dazzling. Her test scores were high, never record-breaking. She participated enough to avoid notice, but never enough to threaten ego. Because her grandmother had once told her, "Baby, don't show the world everything you've got. Some folks don't clap when you shine. They aim." Whitman turned to the board. "I have a problem," he said, writing with dramatic precision. Symbols stretched across the board in white complexity, nested functions, abstract transformations, a layered proof requiring insight, not memorization. "This," he continued, "is something doctoral candidates struggle with." He set the chalk down and stepped aside. 5 minutes. The room leaned back, anticipating collapse. Amara looked at the board, and time slowed. Her heartbeat, which had been steady, became almost quiet, because she recognized it. Not exactly as written, but structurally. The foundation was familiar. She had seen it in a leather-bound notebook covered in dust. 7 notebooks, actually. She found them when she was 13. The attic had always been off limits. Her father said it was full of old things that don't matter anymore. But one rainy afternoon, curiosity won. She climbed the narrow steps and found a box tucked behind winter coats. Inside were notebooks filled with dense mathematical handwriting, precise, elegant, alive. On the first page of the first notebook were the words, "Dr. Naomi Bennett, Ridgewell University, Fall 1996. Her mother. The woman no one spoke about for long. The woman who died when Amara was 6. Her memories were fragments. A warm lap, the smell of coffee, a voice saying, "Numbers don't lie, baby. People do." Whenever Amara asked her father about her, he would grow quiet. "Your mama was brilliant," he would say. "The world wasn't fair to her." And then he would change the subject. The notebooks became Amara's inheritance, her secret curriculum. While other teenagers scrolled through social media, she traced proofs in candlelight when the power flickered. While classmates memorized formulas, she reconstructed them from first principles. By 15, she understood graduate mathematics. By 16, she began challenging it. And in Notebook 4, page 187, dated March 1996, was a variation of the very structure Whitman had written on the board. At the bottom of that page, in neat ink, solved, method C, expand through non-linear bridge. Amara stepped forward. Whispers followed her. Whitman folded his arms, confident. She picked up the chalk. Her mind did not rush. It organized. The first line came easily, a substitution most people would overlook. Then a transformation. Then a simplification that reduced the apparent chaos into symmetry. The smirks faded. Students leaned forward. Whitman took a step closer. "That's not the standard approach," he said sharply. She continued. Because she wasn't using the standard approach. She was using Naomi's. 94 seconds later, she set the chalk down. Done. Whitman stared at the board. He checked each line, then rechecked. His breathing shifted. There were no errors. Worse, it wasn't derivative. It was original. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice tight. "My mother," Amara replied. "What was her name?" "Dr. Naomi Bennett." The name hit him like a physical force, because Naomi Bennett had been his doctoral student 27 years earlier, the same year he published the paper that made his career, the same paper that centered around a breakthrough proof in abstract systems. 2 days later, Amara received an email. Subject: academic integrity violation. She was accused of cheating. The reasoning was simple. No undergraduate could independently generate that method. The complaint was signed by Edward Whitman. For a moment, history threatened to repeat itself. But this time, there were notebooks, original drafts, time-stamped research, preliminary outlines dated months before Whitman's publication. Amara brought everything to Dr. Lillian Carter. Dr. Carter read for nearly an hour. Then she looked up slowly. "Do you understand what this implies?" Amara nodded. "It implies my mother was right." An investigation began quietly. Archives were accessed. Old complaints resurfaced. In 1996, Naomi Bennett had filed a formal accusation of intellectual theft. It was dismissed for lack of evidence. Her funding was withdrawn soon after. Her academic standing deteriorated. She was labeled unstable, difficult, emotional. Within a year, she was gone. Her obituary never mentioned mathematics. As the investigation unfolded, a retired faculty member agreed to speak. He remembered tension, late nights in Whitman's office, boxes of papers transferred before a conference submission deadline. He had stayed silent. "I was young," he admitted, "and he was powerful." 3 independent mathematicians evaluated Amara under controlled conditions. They altered variables mid-proof, removed assumptions, introduced complications. She adapted fluidly. One of them later stated in writing, "Miss Bennett demonstrates generative mathematical reasoning consistent with advanced doctoral capacity." The accusation against her was dismissed immediately, but now the focus shifted. Whitman's publications were re-examined, citation timelines analyzed, draft metadata scrutinized. It became clear the foundational structure of his landmark paper mirrored Naomi Bennett's earlier drafts, nearly line for line in conceptual architecture. The university issued a statement. Edward Whitman's tenure was revoked, his awards rescinded, his landmark paper amended to credit Dr. Naomi Bennett posthumously as co-originator of the core method. A scholarship was established in her name for first generation of Black women in mathematics. At the dedication ceremony, Amara stood holding one of the original notebooks. For the first time, her mother's name was spoken with respect in the same building that erased her. But what made the story powerful was not revenge. It was restoration. A year later, Amara stood at the front of that same lecture hall as a teaching assistant. She noticed a quiet girl in the back row, watching, measuring, calculating her own safety. After class, Amara handed her a blank notebook. "Document everything," she said gently. "Your ideas are valuable." Because this story is not just about a professor who stole research. It is about systems, about how power protects itself, about how institutions often doubt the vulnerable before questioning the powerful. Justice did not come quickly. It rarely does. It came through archived files, through timestamps, through ink that refused to fade, through a daughter who refused to shrink. And that is the part most people misunderstand about stories like this. They celebrate the moment the professor fell, but the real victory was not his downfall. It was the restoration of truth. Because power can delay justice, it can distort narratives, it can intimidate witnesses, but it cannot permanently erase documented truth. And that is the first lesson. Document your work. Protect your ideas. Keep records of your progress. Brilliance without documentation can be stolen. Brilliance with evidence becomes untouchable. The second lesson is harder. Silence protects the wrong people. In 1996, there were whispers, there were suspicions, there were colleagues who felt something wasn't right, but they stayed quiet. Not because they were evil, because they were afraid. And fear, when left unchallenged, becomes complicity. If you ever witness injustice, understand something clearly. Neutrality always benefits the stronger side. The third lesson? Never shrink permanently to make others comfortable. Amara survived by staying quiet, but she succeeded by being prepared. There is a difference. Silence can be strategy, but silence should never become identity. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, systems do not correct themselves out of kindness. They correct themselves when confronted with undeniable proof. Change does not begin with anger. It begins with courage backed by evidence. Years later, when new students walk into that same lecture hall, they will see a plaque on the wall bearing the name Dr. Naomi Bennett. They will not know the pain behind it. They will not see the nights of doubt, the dismissal, the erasure. But they will see her name. And sometimes, that is how justice looks. Not loud, not dramatic, but permanent. So if you ever walk into a room and someone questions your presence, ask yourself this: are they defending standards or are they defending territory? Because there is a difference. And if your work is solid, if your preparation is real, if your integrity is intact, time is on your side. Integrity outlives intimidation, truth outlives theft, and legacy outlives ego. If this story made you think, if it reminded you that preparation matters, if it encouraged you to stand firm when doubted, then please kindly subscribe to echoedtales for more powerful, emotional, and thought-provoking stories like this. Because stories are not just entertainment. They are reminders. They are lessons. And sometimes, they are protection. I'll see you in the next story.